really since the beginning of time. With regards to cyber threats, it wasn't something that we were actively looking at in Canada. And now we have a group that is actively monitoring that space. And then the fourth, and arguably one of the most important pillars, is with regards to social media platforms. So since this announcement, myself and my office have been meeting with the social media platforms to talk about how we can further engage to change some of the behavior that's taking place on their platforms. And we framed it in three kind of value buckets. So ensuring authenticity, transparency, and integrity within their communities. And a couple of the things that we've been talking about are, for example, just enforcing their terms of service. Each of the platforms have community standards in terms of service where they talk about what is acceptable behavior on their platforms, but they don't often enforce it. The other one is with regards to kind of a Canada 2 principle. So things that they've rolled out in other countries to protect their democracies, they should be doing that here in Canada. And the third one is thinking about what they're doing in the European Union. So the social media platforms have signed on to a code of practice in the lead up to the EU parliamentary elections that have a whole range of reporting activities of what's going on their platform, and also the actions that they're taking to stop what could be foreign interference on their platforms. And I have to say that we've been having these conversations, and while each of the social media platforms says that Canada is an important market and says that they really do want to do something here, we haven't seen a whole lot bear out in action. And we're still having those conversations, and they're still underway, but it's becoming quite clear to me that there needs to be more. And there needs to be more, and Canadians need to understand how their information is being used online, how their data is being used, and how social media platforms are actively working to protect our election and prevent some of the activity that we saw in other countries leading up to 2019. So that kind of sums up what our plan is so far. And I think right now, I guess I'll ask Aaron to come up, because I think we're going to have a bit of a conversation, and I really look forward to engaging with you, hearing from you, and sharing whatever I can that will be helpful in this conversation. So thank you very much. Great.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, this was an insightful set of remarks, and as Rohinton said, this is a really pressing public policy challenge, and one might even say it's generational in nature. And by that I mean this is the first time where we've ever had to wrestle with this type of stuff before. As you said, foreign interference is a tale as old as time. Espionage is something that's happened since there's been countries, but this is the first time where the public has been a target, and this is the first time that we've had social media companies play the role of the public space. So you talked about wanting more from them. What should we expect of these companies, given how important they are, not only in our daily lives, but in our democratic processes?
Well, so it's a really good question, and I think one that democratic countries around the world are wrestling with, because I think we all recognize that in so many ways, social media has been a real democratizing factor, right? I mean, it's amazing that, I can communicate with essentially anyone in the world at any given time. That's fantastic, and we want that communication to carry on. But at the same time, we're seeing a lot of manipulation of the platforms. We're seeing how, they subvert democracy, and actually, in many ways, how, people going on and seeing a lot of the negativity is actually turning people off of democracy as well, and in some instances making people feel powerless, when in fact it should be the opposite. And so how do social media platforms start to recognize that they too have a responsibility in their actions and in how their spaces are used? And I would say that until very recently, and many ways still going on, is that the platforms like to say, we're just a highway. What's ever happening on our highway, kind of not, it's not really our problem. Like it's, like saying there's a car accident and blaming the highway for it, right? Or to say, we're not publishers or we're not broadcasters. We're just a platform where things happen. But the fact of the matter is that they're not neutral, right? We know that the algorithms that they have push content to individuals based on what the algorithm thinks you want to see. But that algorithm isn't neutral either. There have been human inputs into that. One of the things that a colleague was recently saying that resonated a lot with me is that if you're the editor of a newspaper, you're responsible for everything that's in that newspaper. The ads, the editorials, the content, you're responsible for all of it. The same should be the case with regards to social media platforms. And so how do we ensure that people can still share, they can still, interact, they can still connect, they can still take advantage of all of those really great things while ensuring that we also have some standards with regards to what that content looks like. And to me, it seems like, if it's illegal, that should be a pretty, kind of easy standard to
That's
set.
fairly low-hanging fruit,
Yeah.
right? So you had said something interesting in your remarks, and I want to come back to, and I don't want to dwell solely on the question of platform governance, but I really do think that this is an important issue. And so you talked about the code of conduct in Europe and basically transparency and accountability and ensuring that these companies are enforcing their terms of service. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking, if they can do it in Europe, they could do it here, so it's a choice. And then it strikes me, where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit, and I happen to sit in a global governance think tank, so my mind automatically goes to international coordination. Is there some sort of international coordination problem here, and can Canada be playing a bit more of a leadership role in that space?
Yeah, so I think the first comment that you made, that it's a choice, is really important. And if any of you have been following this issue recently, you would have seen that a couple of weeks ago, Mark Zuckerberg actually put out a Facebook post calling for global governance of social media platforms. Now you can question the sincerity of that, because obviously global governance takes a long time to do, and it would be easier for the platforms to have one set of rules where they can follow around the whole world as opposed to each country, but we know how long it takes to get one set of rules internationally for anything. But I think that Canada can absolutely play a leadership role in this space. And I would also say that it's at a time when different countries are coming to the same realization. The UK released a white paper about 2 weeks ago on social media governance. Australia introduced legislation that would hold social media executives liable for violent extremist content on their platforms. New Zealand is interested in this space. France introduced laws with regards to fake news. Germany has a new hate speech law. So there's a lot of like-minded countries that are all coming to this around the same time, and I think we have a moment where some international standards and norms can be set.
No, that's fair, and your point is not lost on me, where global governance rules typically take a long time. No one has ever accused international lawyers of moving too fast on anything.
Yeah.
I'm allowed to make that joke because I'm an international lawyer. But and maybe there's a decent segue here to talk about individual responsibility. But before I ask my next question, I'll simply let the audience know that there are microphones here, and we do want this to be a conversation with the audience. So there's a microphone on the left and right sides of the auditorium. Please feel free to come up and just introduce yourself and then and ask your questions. But we definitely do want it to be a conversation with the audience as well. And so kind of moving from platform governance type issues to individual responsibility, I mean, at the end of the day, an individual has to walk in and cast a ballot. And so what can actual Canadians, like given the fact that social media companies aren't necessarily moving as quickly as we'd like, given the concerns around international law and legal development, what can Canadians do in the here and the now to make sure that they're not being preyed upon by foreign adversarial states?
It's an excellent question, and it's really important. That's why it forms one of the pillars of our plan as citizen resilience, is first of all to be critical of what you're seeing online, to check the source. So, I'm very proud of Canadian election legislation. writ large, even before the changes, because I think we have one of the more robust elections legislations around the world. And one of the things that I think is really important is this notion of transparency, where whatever you're advertising, you have to have a watermark that says who paid for this advertising, and I think that's really important. And then with regards to third-party advertising, not only who paid for it, but you then have to be able to contact them as well. So when you're seeing things online, to be a bit more critical and to pause before you share something. Because I think one of the things that we all experience in the 24-hour news cycle that we have in the constant space of social media is that an idea or an issue can travel really quickly around the world before it's verified if it's actually true or not. And so on the one hand, that's really good and exciting, but on the other hand, it means that we all have to take a moment before we share something and pass it on to make sure that it is in fact true. And I think particularly with regards to disinformation campaigns that could be coming from some foreign actors, that's intentional to try and divide people. And one of the things that we've seen in other elections around the world is that the intent is not necessarily to support one party or the other. The intent is to create chaos, to create confusion, and a distrust of democracy. And so part of it is understanding what the intention is and to look for signs of whether this is verifiable or not. And, as I said in my remarks, we are very trusting of the information we see. And inherently, I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think it's good to be trusting. But on the other hand, we can look at accounts on Twitter or Facebook or wherever they may be, and if they're sharing content at a rapidity that is beyond human scope, it's probably because they're not human. Right? They're probably a bot. And if they have 3,000 tweets but 5 followers, they're probably not real. And so just to make sure that we're doing that checking. And then I'd say the other thing for this crowd, which is informed and engaged in this issue, is have those conversations with your community, with your family, with your friends as well. Because at the end of the day, so long as the actual ballots aren't stuffed and the results aren't hacked, that's the outcome of the election. And that's what Canadians decided. So how can we ensure that Canadians have the tools and the resources to make decisions, informed decisions on accurate information?
No, that's I think a really, really astute way of putting it, and so almost like a trust but verify type of assessment. And to be fair, and this is a little bit embarrassing, but on April Fools, there was a tweet that went around about the headquarters of the United Nations moving to Toronto, and I was briefly elated for a mere moment. And that share button is so close, and so what you're saying is maybe take a minute.
Yeah.
Before you share it. Now, that actually leads into another thing that I've been thinking about, is this idea of deep fakes. Does everyone here know what a deep fake is? And does anyone not know what a deep fake is? Okay. Do you want to talk about what a deep fake is?
You're welcome to talk about what a deep fake is.
So basically, imagine for a moment.
I don't want to be held responsible for.
Yeah. So, well, imagine for a moment. There was a video of President Obama, and the content of which I can't remember. Suppose President Obama was condoning the smoking of cigarettes and encouraging the nation's youth to go out right away and pick up a pack of cigarettes. Obviously, you know that that's not something that President Obama would ever say, but it looked so real. It mimicked his mannerisms, it mimicked his voice, it mimicked his tone. The only thing that was off was the content. Mm-hmm. And it was done by, it was a computer-generated image based on an individual who was effectively hooked up to a graphics program on a computer. And fast forward, layer on artificial intelligence, and the problem is going to get so much worse. So what we're looking at right now with Russian bots and fake Twitter accounts is like the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. This is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So have you given any thought to how we wrap this around with next-gen technologies?
Yeah, so I mean, deep fakes was something that I thought a lot about. I never thought I'd be thinking about deep fakes. when we updated our elections legislation. And one of the updates in C76 is with regards to impersonation. And so we hived off if it's for satirical or parody, but it has to be very clearly labeled that this is a satire or parody. You can't, you know, and that's not just with regards to deep fakes, but anything, a Twitter account.